very honestly, it's just some basics about quantum nanophotonics and a few other topics here and there regarding it, your work in the field of quantum mechanics, and then a few philosophical tangents. So, is
I'm absolutely, you're absolutely fine. It's remarkable that we can actually communicate like that over quite some substantial distances.
but yes. First question, I'd like to give you a brief intro to quantum nanophotonics, what it is, its trends, its future developments, your work in it.
Delighted. So it expresses quite a lot from the expression itself. There's quantum in there, there's photonics in there, and there's nano in there. So three vital ingredients that kind of add together and come together to facilitate something. So what is it that we're looking at? So the photonics certainly means that we're working with light. And light is normally, in most cases, as we've come to know it, it has a certain association with wavelength or color. And in most cases, when we, for example, have the visible light that we look at, the wavelength associated, for example, if we pick green or something like that, is about 500 nanometers. And for many nanotechnologies that are out there at the moment, 500 nanometers is way too big. It's huge. And this is one of the reasons that for many years in physics, where most foci were on electronic effects on the nanoscale, and people considered light only just as a helper or something that would deliver energy. But recent developments that were triggered, like for example through photonic crystals first, and then later on through metamaterials and plasmonics, nanoplasmonics in particular, has allowed to effectively quench the wavelength of the light to such a degree that it is now on scales which is absolutely comparable to the scales where electronic effects matter. And was a little bit like a revolution. A revolution that's saying that suddenly light is on equal par. And as we know today, it's even on scales. If you think about the near field, which is a strongly sub-wavelength variation of electromagnetic radiation, suddenly we discover almost like a whole new world of electromagnetics that opens the door to interact with matter in a very different way. So if we allow light through particular means, we create an environment where light gets squeezed by transferring it to a different type of light, then we can use that in order to access and use energetic entities that are extremely relevant, for example, for the whole quantum domain, that otherwise would not be able to, we would not be able to access. So there's that revolution that has been started, and this is actually rather new. It's not something that you would have been able to do like 20 years ago. It's something that came out of the developments of nanotechnology, the realization that nanoplasmonics can do something in a different way. It has its strength, it has its challenges, but on the other hand, one can use that. And if one now brings this together with quantum effects, and in the same way, quantum effects are not new at all. I mean, they are about 100 years old. And the way that quantum effects were originally invented is because people realized there's many things out there that physicists saw, like for example, that when how light was absorbed, and you could only explain that if you invent a completely different theoretical understanding, which is the quantum mechanics. Now, while this was initially used in order to explain how atoms and molecules and things like that worked, triggered by developments about in the late 1980s, 1990s, there was thoughts that, oh, if we were to be able to use the laws that governs atoms and light on scales like that, if we were to make that useful in a circumstance, then we could use it, for example, to invent a completely new kind of computation. We could communicate in a different way with different types of communication elements. We could sense in a very different way. So all of these things brought together, then coming back to the question is, what do we do with quantum nanophotonics? Well, we actually add them all together. We have photons, and we allow, through creating an environment where light is now on extremely small scales. And because it is on these extremely small scales, it can facilitate in its interaction with matter, with an atom, with a quantum dot, with a so called quantum emitter. It can facilitate a very new state where now light and matter actually join. You need that, for example, if you want to go and transmit a quantum signal, and you want to interact with that and in something which is based on a condensed matter structure. So somehow quantum information, which is transmitted ideally through light in a fiber or in free space, if you want to change that, if you want to interact with it, if you want to process it, you need to sooner or later have it interacting with something else. And by itself, light is not very good at interacting with itself because it just crosses another. So light with light doesn't do much with it. You need to have a medium where you actually facilitate an interaction. And in doing that, one can make light to become interactive with another light beam, which doesn't give us the quantum effect yet. So then one needs to go and make sure that if light has quantum features, such as properties of a single photon, that these quantum features are then mapped over to a condensed matter system. And from there on, again, one can map it back onto light in order to transmit it further. So the whole philosophy is pretty much like, we want to go and use light. We want to go and make light useful on an extremely small scale for quantum technologies, in particular for where photons are extremely good for quantum communication. One can also compute things with that, but it's quantum communication in particular. And then one can use this in order to facilitate then other processes like quantum sensing, in a way.
And how far are we at completely harnessing the potential of this domain?
We are at the beginning where we have demonstrated that it is not just a theoretical folly. So where see, as this was a kind of a breakthrough where my whole work that I'm doing is a little bit like how one could compare with an architect. I design things, I interpret things, I theoretically investigate and computationally model how light interacts with matter, how light wanders through certain channels and things like that. But then I collaborate very, very closely with experimentalists who then really build the environment, who really realize it at all. And that, having said that, there's about a little less than 10 years ago, we demonstrated this was a very close collaboration with a team at the University of Cambridge in the UK, where we could say that that fundamental element of a single photon with a single atom, there's this kind of quantization requirement, is possible on an extremely nanoscale of just about a single nanometer. And the important step in that, and I have not mentioned that yet when I said why is it so important to make light and matter in these environments, is that in most quantum relevant environments, you're confined to cooling down whatever you want to do as a quantum system to cryogenic temperatures in the millikelvin regime. However, when you get light to such extremely small scales and you use a plasmonic cavity, a cavity which is actually allowing light to be focused on a very tiny spot, in this case it was like a so-called ring on a surface, a nanoplasmonic particle on a surface that acts as a mirror between two. So if you have that environment, well then that light can interact in such a particular special way so that it works even at room temperature. And that was the revolution in it. So how far are we in this? Well, we've demonstrated that it works. We now need to go and discover more functionalities of that. And we will not replace everything. I'm rather sure of it that quantum computers, or these nascent quantum computers today, because what we honestly have at the moment are prototypes that do certain things well, but they're not there yet where they use their full potential. And anything like that, and increasing even with present day quantum computational technology, needs a nanoscopic quantum communication. And that is one of the ways where we hope to facilitate improvement, progress through research. So the main aim really is we know we need to do something about where we are today as a technology level. But it is my fundamental belief that that technology level needs further scientific endeavor. It needs further scientific discoveries or ways how to exploit that world of science to be then funneled into these developments that we then exploit in the engineering realm, which means to really make things happen. So the role as a physicist here is really like a little bit like we want to demonstrate that something works. And a particular feature of that is also we want to understand why something works, or maybe perhaps why it doesn't work so well. That is a very fundamental principle of why and how, in so many ways, one has a is always it is always good for a physicist to be able to understand to a certain limit within one's present day limit of understanding what is going on. And with that, one can improve, one can change, and one can also facilitate new other elements in that.
I, I, I also believe that currently work is being curated at trying to achieve strong coupling in these quantum systems at ambient temperatures.
That
What are the current challenges to it, and what are the approaches we are currently dictating towards this to sort of overcome this?
the whatever I've just talked about has this implication. The effect behind it is indeed the strong coupling. So strong coupling means that light and matter, whenever they come together, they not just interact weakly, which is the normal thing how light would interact with matter, but rather they create a new state. And we call this hybridization. And this new state is, in that respect, a state where dynamically one shifts properties between things that one would normally associate with light. And for a while, then this changes over to a state which is more strongly associated with a condensed matter system, with a quantum emitter. So this hybridization, this strong coupling of light and matter, allows them to exchange that information. So why do we want to do this at room temperature? Well, you can imagine the problem in this is that prior to our demonstration about, I think we published this in 2016 originally, and then in another experimental collaboration, which was with the University of Würzburg, with whom we are now continuing to collaborate very closely on follow-up developments on that. But the challenging aspects on this is that in the systems that allow strong coupling, traditionally were chosen to be. You literally have two different opportunities to do this. You have to, let's just imagine we want to have light and matter strongly coupled. What do we need to do? We need to make sure that whenever there is a certain strength that light would normally interact with a quantum emitter, let's say a two-level system. That's a very famous concept in physics, that one has two energetic levels, and because energy in certain like quantum emitters or other systems has a certain prescribed transitional level, so that is exactly corresponding to a particular wavelength. Naturally, it's not just exactly that level, but it has a certain breadth of the system. And normally, if one wants to have light and matter interacting, The traditional way to do this was to put it all into a box, into a cavity, where both the light was contained through mirrors and where the quantum emitter was contained. Then you would make sure that as little as possible of the light, once it is inside, in order to pump the system so that it can relax. And while relaxing, it would again be pumped up. This is what strong coupling then requires. Then would be achieved because you almost don't allow any light to get out of that box. You make the reflectivity as high as possible. That's the conventional approach. The consequence of this very high reflectivity, one charts this nowadays in terms of a so-called quality factor. So the better this cavity is, also the more resonant it becomes, which means it just selects only a single frequency, a single color, if you may, that where it has that high reflectivity. And as a consequence, in order to match the quantum emitter and that high reflectivity that allows then the feedback of light, literally you have to match up the emission of the atom here now in the spectrum or the quantum emitter and the light in order to happen. So this is at the moment like my atom, and there is the resonance that we have there. So if you do this in this very confined cavity, you need to go and stop the emission to wobble about, which is normally happening if we were, for example, at higher temperatures. So you need to cool down the emitter so that it stays exactly at one wavelength and only emits there, so that it can be coupled exactly at that wavelength of the cavity. Otherwise, you lose again your coupling. But the problem is you need to cool things down. If you now want to do the opposite, if you want to go and have a light interacting very strongly, but maybe in a different type of cavity, instead of making it in a very high quality factor cavity, which are usually somewhat large, you can also confine it to a particular extremely small space. And that's the approach that is offered through the nanophotonics or nanoplasmonics approach. So here now, the reflectivity is not so much, not remotely as high as in the so-called dielectric systems, but it is broadband. It's effectively has not this very limited spectral runs along here distribution, but it has a very broadband feature, which then allows the emitter to move about and still perceive a similar amount of feedback, because the feedback is lower, but it is more broadband in it. So it is in principle doable at ambient temperature. But there's a disadvantage of that, because the cavity, although it is very, very small, these nanoplasmonic systems now are, on the other hand, completely open. They don't have walls anymore. They're just confined. Naturally, you get the light in the form of another hybrid element. It's actually the hybridization of a so-called wave of electrons on the surface of these metallic properties, which is called a plasmon. And when this hybridizes with light, one calls this surface plasmon polariton. So these surface plasmon polariton are literally light with a smaller wavelength, because they are now waves of electrons, but they act as if they were light. And if you couple that, this special type of light, with the quantum emitter, you can use it at a tiny, tiny location in that cavity. But since you don't couple light directly, but you couple it through this electron density wave, you also lose a lot of your energy that you originally supplied into the system. So that challenge is, how can you retain as much energy as possible? Because clearly there's so little energy available through a single photon. You want to go and use what you have. One solution to that is to allow or to use another effect, because we haven't really talked about time yet, because one of the processes that effectively is the case, that high reflectivity means that it is the higher cut a long story short, the higher the quality factor is, or wants to be, the slower processes are dynamically in a cavity like that. It takes time to achieve that. Whereas if you have a lower quality factor and it is more broadband, dynamics can even be enhanced in its emission. And that was the revelation that for extremely small scales, you could speed up the emission of the atom of the quantum dot so substantially that that when that happens, the strongly coupling event will actually realize. Now, what is a challenge? It is quicker. So if you perform your process of mapping in and mapping out quantum information faster, which has another advantage, uh, because it avoids the no average speed of quantum fluctuations or phase fluctuations, but you perform it faster, then it still decays very quickly. So you have a chance when maybe one or two mapping over oscillations in the system. And there we've recently come across a novel effect, which is one that is extremely new. It's just this very recent publication that appeared like in July of this year in the journal Nature Communications, where we promoted then an effect that we called quantum nanoplasmonic coherent perfect absorption. And in this case, this decay of the signal is is prevented because it effectively creates a state where an incoupling coherent beam is now hybridized not just with the emitter and the quantum emitter, but also with the pump. It's like being cloaked. I'm a little bit now vague in what I'm saying. This would be merit another full explanation in that. But just saying to this is a way where one can exploit the fact that there is so much loss to tune the losses of a plasmonic system so that effectively one has a immortalization, quasi-immortalization of a particular quantum state. It doesn't decay because already the other decay channels have been interferometrically suppressed, so one can only pump the one that one actually likes. And you see, fundamental work is required in order to circumvent challenges. But I'm quite confident that actually through science and some investigations in that and finding novel effects, one can actually advance our technological advances with in ways that at the moment we don't even quite know, while also discovering new things, which is the beauty of it if one works on that interface where one has very fundamental quantum work is still very fundamental. And on the other hand, one needs to go and link it up with engineering challenges and perspectives in order to make it a reality that is not just in the lab, but further than that.
It's quite beautiful in its nature of working.
I'm, I'm inspired to say that this is nature is again opening us up in the way that we see this, giving us opportunities. See, the whole quantum business at the moment is very focused on, well, it's a very short way how to say this. How can you make quantum effects a reality? The major two ways are the ones that one says either I make things small enough or I make things cold enough. And most of the quantum computing solutions have taken the route of using cryogenic environments to create as qubits, these so-called transmons or superconducting quantum interference devices, where one then creates this kind of quantum logic where I didn't really talk about much about yet, but this is the whole framework by which that works. And a big community of researchers nowadays works on algorithmically using quantum entities in order to have new properties associated with them. But I'm a firm supporter of saying that if we want quantum to succeed in its full strength, we need to continue to invest more time and effort into the fundamentals because we have not even remotely used the potentials of quantum technologies. And if we use present day technologies and nothing else, there may be some obstacles on the way to actually do that. So we really need to find alternatives, and we are using alternatives in this, not for everything, but for selective parts. And this quantum nanophotonic element, I'm particularly confident and keen to realize this in terms of not the quantum computation by itself, but rather the quantum communication aspect. So it could very well be that present day technologies, to a certain degree, will move on for now in a similar way as we have them now, but then they need to become more modular and they need to be linked by novel ways how to do that. So that's the way how one interlinks that. And how to find that and how to do this, that's in very many cases still an important element of research, open research that needs discoveries or actually is hungry for more discoveries. So we have every reason to continue to explore opportunities here and different routes, not just following traditional ones, but rather also searching for new ones and new ways how to achieve that.
Another significant matter that you mentioned in our previous chat was the energy crisis for quantum processing and AI. How do you see that, and how do you feel we can take actionable steps from this time, particularly into the future, over a long term period, and sort of overcome this entire thing?
That's almost like building on a little bit what I try to link at. I mean, we are investing a lot of energy in order to make a quantum process in a quantum computer. It's a huge lab. It's a huge, especially cryogenic environment that we need to maintain. And you can imagine every effort that every energy, as the more energy you can take out of that process, the better it is for sustaining what we are building up here in this case. It's almost like, well, we want to build a quantum computer, we want to build quantum communication to help us finding solutions like better materials so that our energy hunger is less. But at the moment, we are actually charting a way to use a lot of energy in order to actually make that quantum computer a reality. So we need to be mindful in saying that the more we can use our understanding to actually not just discard, but rather enhance processes that would use less energy while maintaining a quantum state or a quantum communication state is extremely valuable. We just have an obligation almost to do that, because otherwise we would create more energy hungry processes rather than anything that would help us in different ways. It is really like we need to be mindful, and that's the point. So that's the research to find things at room temperature or at higher temperatures that are less cryogenic, are only natural to seek, because finding by switching perhaps partially or as much as possible to a different technology helps, and that's an important aspect in that. And we have many examples how to do this, how we use less energy hungry things. And it's almost like that in technological development, is in order to show in principle that something works. You don't actually, you just invest in that realization. You don't necessarily take what one would call a secondary effect into account. But that secondary effect could quite quickly become a primary effect because it is so strong that in order to move forward, you need to go and find a completely different solution in the first place. Thus, that demonstration of the in principle realization is valid and incredibly important. But at the same time, it is also a call for, if it is done in an environment which needs a lot of effort, a lot of energetic effort and other effort, to not stick with it only and to seek other alternative solutions. It may very well turn out that it is the only solution there is. And then there's nothing what one can do. One has to take it. But I think we have an obligation to explore alternatives if these alternatives could be better and more beneficial. Maybe not immediately, but in a certain medium term that they can partially or in some ways more and more replace other things. A little bit like saying that we uh, it's almost like an obligation towards our environment to do this. And if we wouldn't do it, I think we wouldn't really have or do our jobs very well if we would just follow old routes. We do exactly what previous people have done. If we see something doesn't quite work ideally, or if we can't understand how things work, well, then let's see that we perhaps through science and understanding and exploration and develop a new approach that helps us in many ways. There will be parts where probably one will need lower, for example, lower temperature and energy hungry solutions for a little while to come, like for example for the detection. But even the change of the millikelvin, extremely low temperature regime to something like 10 Kelvin is a huge gain because now one can use them processes other than others, or even regimes like 77 Kelvin. The pandemic has told us how to use temperatures in that regime because we needed to go and chill the vaccines at this particular temperature. So an intermediate step would be incredibly helpful to have technology working not at millikelvin, but rather at whatever single digit or maybe at the hundreds and of kelvins, rather than here just in the millikelvin regime, as an example. So in a way, one could even target what we're aiming for is like a green quantum. We want to go and develop as much as possible an environment where quantum effects don't need that extreme environment. It needs clever understanding or elaborate thoughts about how one can retreat certain fundamental processes, I think. And that's why we are hopeful that through insight and we can advance the process there as well. And by the way, if we do that as a side product, since many quantum sensing processes, for example, in the biological regimes, they don't happen all at cryogenic temperatures, but rather in temperatures in which we live, in which cells live. In order to monitor and observe cells, one can use a much, much heightened and very important quantum sensing element in it. And that again is something that one can hope to facilitate along those lines.
Taking a philosophical tangent, I recently had a random thought trail. Can the complexities of quantum realm, if at all, provide insight into the human existence at whole? Like we know it can provide insights towards the origination of the universe itself, but can it to any extent whatsoever provide any kind of pointers or things that we might not really know yet about the human life and our existence as individuals?
Right. The human life, the human spirit, the human understanding is an amazing thing. The fact that we're talking, the fact that we're thinking, that we're discussing that is just testament of the fact that there's something more than the electrons and the neurons and things like working together as far as we understand how the brain works nowadays. Our existence, how does that emerge from this? We are perhaps witnessing a similar behavior, how through an algorithm, some kind of characteristics can emerge. Well, the algorithm renews itself in terms of a program. The program allows that. So, are we witnessing something similar here? And in a sense, we could argue that eventually this is what happens in the brain. It's a number of chemical processes, there's a number of electronic processes. There's probably some quantum involved in that as well. The reason for calling it quantum is this is a framework that was set up, that was, you may regard it like that, invented, a basis of how we understand, how we can describe reality. A reality in extreme situations, such as I said, very small environments, the atomic scales, or very cold environments, or where we manage to get these two together, and where we have light not just interacting in a normal way, or in a way that one can think about. I mean, one of my favorite iconic pictures is this kind of conference in 1927. If you look at that famous picture, it's one of these conferences where in Brussels, one get to see that it was about electrons and photons. And at that time, they discussed that novel quantum behavior. And if you look at that, and the participants in there, they were all involved in setting up that new framework. It's something we set up. It's a descriptive environment and framework that helps us understand what is going on. But it may or may not be the correct one. It's one that we set up, the axioms that we defined, and we can see that based on that and our logical following of this, we have a very high accuracy of understanding what is going on in nature. And that's literally like the following thing in that. There's other people and other philosophical thinkers, they approach things from the opposite. They think, well, everything that the world is governed by a set of equations, and these equations are not all yet discovered. And if when we discover them and can have them to explain things that we observe, then we discover part of that. And if there's something that we observe in nature and we can't explain in equations anymore, well, then it's just because we haven't discovered the correct equations yet. And there's no really philosophical way how to prove either direction or the other. My own way of is more inclined to say it's almost like to say nature is so inspiring and so powerful. It's probably that with our humble way of finding or setting up equations in that help us to understand it in the way an equation is like a language, where we want to go and learn how mathematically we can describe or how a particular system evolves. That is a helping descriptor for that. It doesn't mean that it is reality yet. This is more like philosophically that picture of it. So it means we have an opportunity to find, set up, derive, invent equations that describe a certain phenomena in nature, in the quantum regime, because we've seen something in an experiment. It works, maybe not, but if it works, we're happy and we accept this as a valid theory. And if we derive it, first of all, from so-called first principles, that again we build as a foundation, then we also think that's something that is acceptable. But really, philosophically, is this there? And it can certainly help us perceive a better understanding of what makes us human. And it's a very good question, and probably one could philosophically discuss this at incredible length. My view on this is that it's almost like nature is a very powerful thing, and it's an impressive way how it materializes both on the extremely small scale as well as in nature when we walk in a forest or when we enjoy sunshine outside, and that is certainly some of the signatures of what nature can do. One can also see that it is a very precious environment that one needs to go and treat carefully. We're not at all doing that at the moment. So again, that motivational side, we need to make sure that that novel thing that we are creating, this is these kind of quantum environments, where we're mindful of what the expense is that we are creating there in terms of energy requirements. So again, many things to discuss, but I like your philosophical part to that, and I think one could certainly say a lot more about it if one would want to.
Expanding upon just that, I remember a personal anecdote, if you may, right? A few years ago, I read a thought experiment by Stephen Hawking, most probably, or somebody else, I'm not sure. But it was along the lines of how a goldfish, if it's put in a container at your home, if it were to derive physical laws for the world, it would be deriving it from the lens of that glass. And therefore, from our perspective, its physical laws would inherently be subject to errors and an inherent bias. So, my question, sort of an extended question to this is, what is the limitation of human understanding, like, if at all there is one? What is a point from where we cannot probably comprehend after, even if we try to venture into the unknown?
I mean, from our understanding, we are, you and I, we are in a certain moment in time. We're meeting at the moment, and we cover a certain space, and we're linked at the moment through technology. But other than that, we're all on Earth, and we are at that moment in time where we exist. Our views are what we can understand and depict towards the back, towards the past, where we can read signatures of what people have done before, either by, in the modern world, looking at recordings from 5 days back, 10 days back, something like that. How far can we look? How can we venture outside of that goldfish tank, if you put it that way? Well, at the moment, that's what astrophysics is doing. I mean, they are conducting and venturing outside of that box. And from what all we understand, the laws that work here on Earth are not so different from the laws that work on Mars, as what the physics is concerned, nor in another universe. Because it seems to be that whatever happens there, what happens there, it still governs similar physical entities, like that gravitational effects and forces and things like that work in a particular way. They're not without. So if something works there like that and it works different in the other way, well, it's very likely the signatures that we receive from that the physics is not changed in these different worlds, although they're extremely far away. So our goldfish tank is continuously increasing, and as a result of that, we perhaps have also a so in some ways an increasing awareness. But from what we can see at the moment, uh, forward and backwards, and in some ways, again by observing astrophysical dimensions, some of those signatures that we receive nowadays in our telescopes, in our ways, they actually don't show the reality from now, but rather from a long time back, because that's still the time it took for that information to actually arrive where we can measure it here. So, with all likelihood, these laws have been around for a while as we create them. And with all expectations, they will also be around for a little while in the future, as far as we can see that. Once we go beyond events like the Big Bang and other things like that, I have very little information to even speculate. I try to limit whatever I can try. And in some ways, I'm, you see, while I have a keen interest in what happens in astrophysical dimensions. The, the difference of orders of magnitude from where we are, order one, like a meter, to astronomical dimensions in space, length scales, are as far as to the nanoscale from where we are at the moment. So my universe is an exploring element is more a little bit like the nano domain, the nanospace that is explored. And the particular element how to do this is is to almost like dive into that regime. And in the same way as in astrophysical dimensions, it is relativistic effects that are incredibly important. On small scales, it is the quantumness that dictates how things work. Again, philosophically taken in that.
Uh, while I was researching for this conversation, I got to know about your work in nonlinear spatio-temporal dynamics between light and matter. Uh,
Mhm.
and there was something that I came across termed as quantum chaos. I'd like you to explain what it is and how is it sort of curated to control this particular phenomena.
The work on where we worked on this quantum chaotic part was very closely related to the normal chaos. And the normal space-time dynamics, the normal thing, is one of my other research strands. The spatial temporal dynamics of very nonlinear systems. In this case, it is very particularly one of the lasers that we were looking at, and a particular type of laser at that time is a so-called semiconductor laser. That's where, for example, from a semiconductor, an extremely small little part chunk of material, one can create a state where one can emit light. One uses this in everything, like in a computer mouse or in a laser pointer or in most things. There's probably some type of semiconductor laser or diode involved in generating the light. If, under certain circumstances, one can make these lasers very large, they don't behave like a normal laser anymore. They behave like something that forms a high degree of complexity. Interacting light fields and matter fields create states that change the property of a former laser because they're not like whatever you wanted to do. They're really like many so called modes interacting. And we found a way that by changing the size of that laser and actually more the shape of it, one can create a state where the light is not in a normal way, but it is like confined where one has a way of creating a particular type of disorder that prevents the formation of these non-linearities that lead to this kind of chaotic space behavior. The example I always like to cite in cases like that is that like the formation of tornadoes. Tornadoes, as we've known recently, are very, very havoc creating extreme events of wind. That wind focuses extremely on a particular time. It evokes high nonlinearity to create a very, very disastrous amount of energy that can destroy whole towns and things like that. And if one uses the a bit of a map where most of these tornadoes actually occur over in the United States, one can see that with higher likelihood they occur on flat surfaces because then temperatures and the wind can create conditions where this is very, very likely. Whereas on the other hand, in spaces where one has many hills higher up, it's less likely for that to occur. We have a bit of an example in a recent larger storm that made its way through the United States. Part of it had also the formation of tornadoes in a more hilly area. But normally, these hills they lead to a less likely formation of that. The problem is now how do you create these hills? And uh, with the laser, and in the people were always frantically looking for ways how to control space-time dynamics in these semiconductor lasers because the larger they are, the more powerful they can be and the more useful they become. But you couldn't control it because in the laser inside, you can't really get inside. It's a bit like if you have here something on your here. If there's an ailment inside of your body, and to control something through through the from the side is a little like if you wanted to go and heal something inside of your finger, that is, is going wrong inside of the finger, but the only thing you can do is you can apply ointment to the skin because you can't really reach the inside, otherwise your finger wouldn't work anymore. So how can you control and change something internally? And there it was the use of so-called wave chaos, which is that when uses a particular cavity, when that's light to be bounced in a particular way so that it forms a trajectory that one can describe with so-called quantum trajectories, because this quantum is because one uses an electron in a larger cavity to obey structures like that. So these kind of wave or quantum chaotic ways how light behaves in particular shaped cavities, they then prevent the formation of the nonlinearities because they are inherent in the semiconductor system. As a result, one has the situation where one actually can fight nonlinear chaos with wave chaos, because that wave chaos creates a randomized structure of variations in the cavity, like inside of your finger. Somehow you manage to go and change something inside that then cures the formation of a problem inside. And that was one of the challenges. So we felt like we could use that effect that can generate these structures inside of the laser in order to do that. And the understanding of it is still an ongoing research topic. It has, for example, also led us to conceive that one can use that approach in order to harvest the quantum fluctuations that we get for free all the time. And they're usually rather detrimental in a laser, but we can harvest them for free if we can get rid of so-called correlations of space and time, because these are the ones that prevent a pure randomness. Because if you can imagine, suddenly, if this is acting randomly and this is acting randomly, then they're a bit like a random thing. But once you link them because of fundamental processes, this one holds on to this one, then whatever this one does is then linked to whatever that one does. And these correlations, they emerge through the fact that matter links them. Inside of lasers, correlations built up. So if you want to then use your laser as a source of these quantum fluctuations that emerge for free from the electrodynamic vacuum, you need to take these correlations apart. And then again, you can do this through this phenomena of quantum chaotic interactions and structures. And as a result of that, whatever happens then inside of your cavity senses directly only the quantum fluctuations. You can use that then as an efficient way how to harvest quantum random numbers. That was a second order development that we built on the first one. You can see sometimes the study of quantum effects, even in lasers. Actually, for me, this was the start of the fascination with quantum effects. Was when I originally it started about almost 30 years ago. My first interests in that was really like still light and matter, but it was more at that time. No one really dared to think about quantum technologies. It was more or less like, how can one use light and matter in things like a laser? And that laser now produces coherence, but it lives with fluctuations. And these fluctuations signal quantum randomness that is always in the vacuum or in materials that are linked to light fields. So the fascination with how one would describe these space-time dynamics and the quantum fluctuations, that was something from a very early on time where some of the fascinations that I felt like in that light-matter interaction very prominently present in all these lasers. So you can see it kind of made its way through the about 30 years or so of academic and research, where one certainly tries to go and change things, perceptions, and explore things and build on elements in that. So I'm very grateful that there is this opportunity to actually use ideas from one way or another and then to bring them together and then build on that. So it's very much like a good thing. And if our young people can go and feel that this is something they would like to do, I'm very happy. I would be delighted to see, because we need inspiration for trying to go and find, read the books of nature in a way in order to improve the way that we as people can live in them in one way or another. I think this is maybe perhaps a motto that one may want to go and follow. I hope.
Also, again, for young researchers, how to properly curate research and then subsequently publish results.
There's another element that you're touching upon there now. One of my second hats that I'm wearing as a researcher, next to the one as researcher or teacher at the university, because we run a Master of Science in Quantum Science and Technologies at Trinity College in Dublin, and where we try to provide our students, our master students here, who come after having had a diverse background in whatever other field, with insight into what quantum systems do. And as part of that, I'm also lecturing about quantum nanophotonics and quantum materials, because I feel it's important for people to know what is going on. It's like someone who gets into a car and wants to drive it, to know how the engine actually works that drives the car forward, not just to sit there, start the ignition and whatever, just drive. That is the use, for example, of a quantum computer. But if you want to go and change how the engine works, you need to go and understand how the engine works. Things like that. And as we know, there are challenges associated with that, even with normal cars nowadays. And there will be much, much more with the quantum parts. For the young people, how can we, what does this reflect? It just reflects that we have that teaching, we have the science that we want to go and research, and then in order to let people know what we have researched, we have to publish it. And you can see there's a good way in this, and I'm a keen. I absolutely like music, and music is always a good understanding how to convey things like you do. It helps you in order to if you want to get ideas in a different way or to enjoy things as an important element in it. If we compare, for example, to our undergraduate studies with how we work, this is a little bit like how one would go and learn an instrument. You would study hard, like, for example, play the violin or the flute or piano. You would study works that other people have composed at a certain time. If it's classical music, you know the ones that been around, whether it's Chopin or Bach or other people. They can be inspiring and they're all on right. You learn how to play that instrument well. And the research part is like where you then not just play what other people have produced. You learn at university what other people have found. It's where you offer your own compositions to the world. So the music that you not just play because someone else has written it, but you compose it yourself. And the same. And so this is a bit like what research is. You find new things, you compose new music, and there's a lot of part is how does a new tune come about? It's not always automatic. Some people are better than that than others, but it's also a little bit like a reaching out. To understand science is one bit. To advance science forward is a lot of work in a way, because you have to learn, you have to be proficient in your instrument. But then some people they don't never learn an instrument. They just sit there and play without having any formal education in it. Happens on the science part as well. People just find out things. Historically, this was the case more than it is nowadays. Most science is actually done in teams. It's a bit like you don't compose yourself, but you work together as a band, if you may, or as an orchestra, and together someone will be a little bit more leading, but everyone will contribute to that. So together you advance a new piece of music. So things are But there's some comparison on that. And the publication process is similar to what we, for example, can then aim to observe that whenever we can download music nowadays and we can listen to it whenever we like. That's the same way as the publications. We publish them so people can read them then at their own leisure. And then we have also our concerts, in abbreviation marks. This is our conferences. This is where we go and share with people and our audience what we've achieved. And we want to get the feedback from our colleagues that listen to us. We tell them new things, but we also want to have from the audience a feedback on what they think about that. So we attend these conferences and we communicate with other people, and they're like concerts. We, as musicians, as researchers, we want to go and be directly observing the feedback. And there's this feedback on spot at the concert, and there's naturally the feedback that we get through the how many people buy our music, how many people read our papers, and things like that. And I'm keenly aware, and this is the other hat, as I said, I'm also editor of the journal APL Quantum. And in APL Quantum, we do have the hope and aim that we can, through offering an open access, so everyone can read whatever is published in APL Quantum for free. We have an opportunity to bridge already many communities within that quantum field. Those who focus more on technological development, those who focus more on fundamental questions associated with quantum, and others who want to use photons or phonons or optomechanical systems and other things like that, as a couple of examples. Those who want to measure things most accurately, those who want to build a quantum computer, others who want to build a quantum communication system, or design and simulate a new material. All of that is related to the quantum science and quantum technologies nowadays. And bringing these together, having a forum for people to exchange ideas, I think is a keen hope that one can get people to interact. So, what we also are hoping for is that people just naturally read the papers, but they also reflect back and saying that we want to go and use that platform like an exchange platform so that other people who publish there also look at the other papers that are also published there so that one can actually cross fertilize certain developments in that. And then we also would like to hear how younger people would like to read their music. Well, I already said music, their science, because in the same way as it is different how we listen to music nowadays from it is 20 years ago even, there is perhaps a difference how people want to read science nowadays. It could very well be people that people don't want to read the paper at all. They just want to have an artificial intelligence system to read the paper for them, put earplugs in their ears and just listen to what they say. Or they want to have a video describing that. Could very well be. But we can only imagine that unless people really approach us with views what they hope to get. So in some ways, to young people, it's an invitation. If you want to see how this works, if you feel like, oh, it would be better for me if we could do that, I can't promise that we can achieve this, but we can at least think about how to do this and work on it to make it better. So there's really the hope that people come and interact and get in contact for doing that.
Along similar lines, for somebody who's probably in high school or pursuing their undergraduate studies, how do they, because nowadays education and knowledge is accessible at its utmost level to everybody and anyone who has an internet connection and probably a device. And if anybody is watching this, they very well may be able to explore different and a plethora of different subjects to their interest and liking. How does somebody at a younger age, so to speak, they sort of dive into the world of research and sort of familiarize themselves with this entire process?
Everyone is different. Some people, they don't need anything more than just a video. Other people just want to go and read a book and then communicate with the book effectively and write something down in an old fashioned way. Others, again, need someone else right next to them in order to exchange ideas. So at a certain stage, I think one needs to find out a little bit how one can best learn, how one can best communicate. And it is very much so that one actually uses the available technology. My feeling is during the time of the pandemic, I was incredibly missing the opportunity. Like at the moment, I'm using how we are interacting. This is something we wouldn't have done without the pandemic. The pandemic is gone. We're still using the technology that we developed during that time through a certain product that allows us to do that. However, I can see that certain conferences and interactions, they're not the same as if I would meet someone in person. Our students at Trinity, they at a certain stage, they were so eager for us to stop just broadcasting. They wanted us to be back in the lecture room. And I think this community building element is vital. Didn't get my ideas from looking at a video. I'm a little bit old-fashioned in this. I get my ideas walking the dog, being outside, looking at the sky, looking at the things, doing things that where things are unexpected. So if I have should I say, a recommendation to people, if they function in a similar way as I do, then I'd say don't just focus on one thing. Work hard if you want to, because in the end, without hard work, you won't get anywhere. I think it's still like that at the moment. This kind of work-life balance is a very, very strong motto. Think about that, do this, but it shouldn't be in some ways in your ways of achieving something. You still need to do and perhaps be familiar with something in one use or so. But as I said, everyone is different, and there's a generational change perhaps working and happening in that. So what I wanted to say, it's ideas and inspiration not only come from focusing on one element, but rather from using inspiration from perhaps completely different fields in order to get somewhere. And our the thoughts about how, for example, the discovery of the DNA structure of life, that was something that Watson and Crick really were building on ideas that Erwin Schrödinger, when he was here in Dublin, he was remarkable. He was here in Dublin for about 18 years, and some of the famous lectures that he gave was with the title "What is Life?" He already postulated that probably life is a building block of a sequence of information that is conveyed in one way or another, very much like the DNA structure. So how come that something which is at home in physics inspires the discovery and the interpretation of life on the other end? This kind of cross-fertilization of different viewpoints, that is what most likely propels insight and advances. So if I can, in this way, say, just focus hard on what you want to do, but also do something else. What that is, whether it's music, whether it's a different science, whether it's sport. Sport is always a good thing to be complementary, because we need to keep our body healthy in the same as we keep our mind healthy. But and that could be also for everyone a different thing. Other people like just to be outside and be quiet. Other want to listen to music. So you have to kind of discover that a little bit, what helps, and then follow that up. How people learn these days, I think the real problem is that exactly what you said. We have too much information, and since we have too much information, we can't grasp it anymore. We don't know what is right, what is wrong, and where we get things from. And very often, we follow the best preacher, in the sense that saying, because there's the difference between knowledge and belief. Because belief asks us to accept something without proof. And there are circumstances, religion, for example, is very valuable Well, we say, okay, we can do that. And but then there's other things in science we actually should say, no, we would like to go and have an understanding that is more than just believing things. It's in the end, at a certain level, a proof as much as we know that things at the particular moment. So, how do we filter this? How do we do that? There again, a solid education of based on something which is not just the problem with the internet, for example, is that you don't know what you read is actually valuable or whether it's complete science fiction. And the way to filter one from the other, if you don't know anything about things, maybe even the science fiction interpretation sounds more plausible. And then you have to say, so why is this the case? Because they have added more emphasis in trying to give you a bit of a view that is maybe not correct, but it appears to be correct. So, in some ways, the studying of certain process is also an implication that we remain vigilant to not just follow crude information out there that is perhaps nothing more than just something that is made up. It's usually quite easy to follow something because it is more easier to understand, or it's more into a particular belief in how things work. Uh, I just think we have, as a society, as we have also an obligation to not just believe things without having a bit of a fact check and person in there in the scientific endeavors as well as in many other things. So, how to filter all that information that is out there, that is really a good challenge. So, a lot of the education probably needs to go and focus on that. But when it gives people also an understanding what they should hopefully trust more than other things.
100%. What makes it even more dangerous is the difference between information and belief is drastic. However, the line dividing the two is extremely fine.
A lot of people, and it's and unfortunately, it's getting into so many domains in life nowadays because the internet gives us a overwhelming amount of information where it is hard for us to do the filtering. And there's a so it's almost like, well, if you want to be educated in certain things, stick to a certain selection of pillars that you can believe and don't listen and look at everything. And maybe use AI to filter a couple of things and with certain parameters. But and there again, the traditional way of seeing that if I see a person right next to me, I can at least sense what this person thinks. So again, maybe we're creating a new elite here, saying that those who can afford to be close to people, understand other people, have a different way of being trusted in things. It's I don't know. It's just a dangerous thing. The overwhelming amount of information is not an easy thing for people to grasp, and one needs to be extremely careful that one doesn't always follow the whatever the most popular decision, neither the one that appears to be correct, but that maybe just because someone else has promoted it in the best way. I'm just giving you a bit of a fact check in this. So it's maybe a really good challenge to see where do we trust information, and I think that's why working on certain pillars of accepted here, I think is a key element in that.
Dr. Ortwin Hess, as my final question to you, where are we headed as a race, as a civilization? Where is humanity headed?
If I knew, well, there's uh, I, I'm fundamentally a positive thinking person. So my hope and belief is that in spite of all the problems we have, and believe me, from about 20 years ago, I thought society was almost like a bit of an equilibrium. But if you see the number of unbelievable events happening at the moment. It's mind-boggling, and why this is very difficult to understand or can comprehend. But where are we heading? The hope is that it is through people who try to work together and try to go and make the greater good work is we find something. But nevertheless, there's this old saying, I think it even goes back to a chap called Martin Luther in the German philosophical domain, say that even if I would know that the world would kind of perish tomorrow, I would still plant an apple tree today, which means try to look positively forward to uh, to see, because an apple tree, certainly you only get fruit after a while, but you anticipate that. You have to do something in order to do this, in the hope that it gets better. So really, we have to try to do our best in order to make that work. Don't allow people to sit back and say that I can't make a change anyways. This shouldn't prevent you from being active and saying that this is worthwhile of doing that. And more likely than anything, on the way there, it can really help and do something good. And very often, like new technologies like the quantum technology, not only has the quantum technology in its as the main aim, but also in its wake, new developments will be discovered that help in completely different ways, not only for quantum but also for other things. So again, an encouragement to seek new ways how to do that. Um,
Dr. Ortwin Hess, thank you so much. It was an utter delight to have this conversation with you.
Thanks for the interest. Thank you. Bye bye.